Well, I had the idea for the premise, which is that a woman shows up to her ex-boyfriend's funeral only to discover that he never told anyone that he dumped her. And then she has to go along with it for the sake of the family. And I had had that idea that kind of popped into my head, and I had no idea what to do with it because I was like, well, then what happens next? Who's to say? I have no idea. And it wasn't until I was preparing for a preventative mastectomy, I'm a carrier of the BRCA1 genetic mutation, that I started kind of having these different things that I was working through that I thought this would be really interesting for a character to be working through. And that other premise that's like, languishing in my notes app of what would be something that would that this character could go through that would be that would make that premise kind of her worst nightmare. And the character of Allison, she had a preventative mastectomy a year ago. So she's recovered from the surgery, but she hasn't emotionally recovered from the diagnosis or the surgery. She really feels a lot of survivor's guilt. She feels this this rejection of all of her other emotions that aren't gratitude surrounding this diagnosis and the surgery. She really feels like she should be grateful. She should be this kind of model survivor, because of what happened to her mom, where her mom had cancer, and that's how she was able to find out about BRCA, which is kind of the odd thing about hereditary cancer is that in order for you to get this information so that you can prevent having cancer, someone you love gets cancer. And that's the only way that you can discover it and get your insurance to cover it and go through that process of proving that you need this surgery. And so she went through that and is feeling a lot of guilt around that. And so the idea that she would be a imposter in her own health journey and then shows up to this funeral and is an imposter in this relationship and kind of how that would unravel in kind of like a darkly comedic way. So it's sort of this kind of forced proximity situation, which is a beloved trope within romance. But I really wanted their relationship to kind of go from people that don't really understand each other to people that are in love by the end. And so I needed them to kind of have time together and time apart, and time together and time apart, so we could kind of see a really organic growth between them from people that don't really know each other well and maybe don't get along right off the bat to kind of friends, and then moving into people who start to really understand each other and fall for each other and kind of have to grapple with the feelings that they have because the reason why they're brought together is because of this person that's between them who's no longer here. And they're also both dealing with their feelings about that person as well. And so the four weekends kind of came about because I really liked the idea that both these people had like kind of 9 to 5 jobs. And because I feel like that's something that isn't always seen in romance, in particular. Like, she doesn't own a candy cane store. Like she's a transportation consultant, and he works in construction. And so then and he's taking time off to do this. And so I kind of liked the idea of them having these kind of ordinary lives and then have this very extraordinary situation every weekend. And then the four, just the idea of the four, came from I was writing this in the month of November, and I was really inspired by the way that the way that that kind of in between season in Minnesota, where we have like this gorgeous fall and then we have this very snowy winter, and November is kind of dreary. I think in the East Coast they call it stick season. It's like very similar to that, where it's just there are no leaves on the trees. It's pretty cold. It gets dark early now, but there's still something really magical and special because we're leading up to all of the holidays, and we're leading up to this time when Minnesota is really beautiful, in my opinion. I loved winter in Minnesota. And so I liked the idea of honoring that time of year, that in-between moment, while they're kind of in this in-between season in their lives. So I really wanted this book to be a love letter to all those 90s rom-coms that I grew up watching. And Because when you're writing your first book, like you don't even know if you're going to have an opportunity to write more books that get out there into the world. So I'm like, this is my shot to really honor all those movies that I loved. Which is we kind of have the For Weddings and a Funeral homage with the grief elements and the friend themes of friendship. And we have While You Were Sleeping is a big inspiration for the way the mechanics of the plot. Um, and also When Harry Met Sally, with kind of these two people that don't get along at first, become friends and then fall for each other. I knew I really wanted the last big climactic, like grand gesture moment to happen on New Year's Day or New Year's Eve. And it ended up being New Year's Day, worked better for what was going on. And I kind of wanted to honor that in that way. So I knew we were going to be heading towards that, but the little in between holidays did shift quite a bit. Like where Thanksgiving happens, at some points it was happening at the family's house. At other points, she was in Michigan. At other points, it was at his family's house. I think in the end, it ended up being a really lovely scene where we get to know Adam's family. But there was so much shifting in that third act in revisions as to like where we are at different points in time for these big holidays that felt important to feature. And I'm happy with where we ended up, but it was a little bit of like there were some moving pieces there.